Channel, Forgotten Heroes. Voice, NUS binaural at rate 0%. Default. Target length, 12 minutes. Almost equals 1800 words at 145 WPM. Style, dramatic restrained, omniscient narrator with occasional present tense placement. Sources cited, Descriptio. Lee Antony Beevor. D-Day, The Battle for Normandy. Viking 2009. Kim, Eugenia. Yang Kyoungjong. The Man Who Fought for Three Armies. Korea Times, June 6, 2010. Hastings, Max Nemesis. The Battle for Japan, 1944-45. Harper Press, 2007. U.S. Army Records, 101st Airborne Division After Action Reports. Normandy, June 1944. National Archives. Record Group 407. Shin Ji-wook. Ethnic Nationalism in Korea. Genealogy, Politics, and Legacy. Stanford University Press, 2006. On the morning of June 6, 1944, somewhere behind Utah Beach, a group of American paratroopers from the 101st Airborne is clearing a farmhouse. They have been on the ground for less than 12 hours. They are tired, lost, and operating on fragments of a plan that fell apart the moment the wind scattered them across the hedgerows of Normandy. Inside the farmhouse, they find a man in a German uniform. He does not resist. He raises his hands. He says something, but not in German, not in French, not in English, not in any language the paratroopers have heard before. They search him. Under the Wehrmacht field gray, he is carrying equipment that is not German. A Soviet-issue canteen. A red army belt buckle. Documents in a script that none of them can read. One of the paratroopers looks at the others. Nobody speaks. Nobody understands. The man standing in front of them, his hands still raised, his face exhausted beyond any expression they can name, is Korean. His name is Yang Kyoungjong. He is 24 years old. And by the time the Americans capture him, he has already fought, not by choice, in 3 different armies on 3 different fronts in a war he never asked to join. Imagine Korea in the 1930s. Not the Korea of Cold War maps, split neatly along the 38th parallel. This is an older Korea, a country that has not been its own for 28 years. Since 1910, the Japanese Empire has ruled the peninsula. Korean names have been replaced with Japanese ones. Korean schools teach in Japanese. Korean men, when the empire needs them, serve in the Japanese army. Yang Kyoungjong was born in 1920, in a country that existed on paper but not in practice. He grew up in a place where patriotism was illegal and obedience was survival. Whatever his parents taught him at home, what the state taught him was simpler: you belong to Japan. In 1938, when he was 18, the Guangdong Army conscripted him. He did not volunteer. There was no mechanism for volunteering. There was only a notice, a date, and a train. He was sent to Manchuria. Manchuria in the late 1930s was a pressure cooker. The Japanese had built a puppet state there, Manchukuo, and they were using it as a staging ground for expansion into China and a buffer against the Soviet Union. The Soviets did not like the buffer. In the summer of 1939, along the Khalkhin Gol River on the border between Manchuria and Mongolia, the 2 empires collided. The Japanese expected a skirmish. What they got was Georgy Zhukov, a Soviet general who would later break the Wehrmacht at Stalingrad, and a force that outnumbered them in armor, artillery, and air support by a factor no amount of courage could close. The Battle of Khalkhin Gol lasted 4 months. By the time it was over, the Japanese had lost 18,000 men. Yang Kyoungjong was one of the ones who survived. But survival, for him, did not mean going home. He was captured by the Red Army. What happened next is the part of his story that the archives leave mostly in shadow. The Soviets did not keep detailed records of every conscripted colonial soldier they took at Khalkhin Gol. What we know is this: they did not shoot him and they did not send him home. They put him to work. The Soviet Union in 1939 was not short on territory. It was short on men willing to defend all of it. Foreign prisoners, if they could hold a rifle, were put in uniform. The logic was not cruelty, it was arithmetic. There were fronts to fill and quotas to meet, and a Korean man who had already been trained to fight was more useful carrying a Mosin nagant than sitting in a camp. So young Kyoungjong, who had been Japanese property 6 months earlier, became Soviet property. He was issued a uniform he did not choose, handed a rifle he did not want, and sent to a front whose politics meant nothing to him. He fought for the Red Army for nearly 4 years. In 1943, somewhere on the Eastern Front, the Wehrmacht captured him. By then, the Germans were bleeding. The turning point at Stalingrad was behind them, and the long retreat westward had begun. Every division was under strength. Every replacement was a gift. And the Germans, like the Soviets before them, had a practical solution for prisoners who could still stand. The Ostruppen, the Eastern troops. These were battalions made up of captured Soviet soldiers, Central Asians, Georgians, Armenians, Cossacks, and others who had been offered a choice that was not really a choice. Put on a German uniform and fight, or remain in a prisoner-of-war camp where the mortality rate was already above 50%. Young Kyoungjong put on the uniform. He was sent west. By the spring of 1944, the Ostruppen were being redeployed to the Atlantic Wall. The logic was brutal. The Eastern Front needed reliable German troops, and the Western Front, where no invasion had yet come, could absorb the foreign conscripts as garrison soldiers. They would man bunkers. They would dig trenches. They would stand behind machine guns pointed at an ocean from which, the German high command quietly feared, something enormous was about to emerge. Young Kyoungjong was stationed in Normandy. He was 24. He spoke Korean and whatever fragments of Japanese, Russian, and German he had picked up from the 3 armies that had owned him. He understood orders. He understood hunger. He understood that no one on any side of any front had ever asked him what he wanted. And then the sky filled with paratroopers. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The 101st Airborne, scattered across the hedgerows, was fighting a war of confusion. They had missed their drop zones. They were fighting in small groups, clearing farmhouses and crossroads, trying to piece together a coherent line from the chaos. In one of those farmhouses, they found him. The Americans had been trained to process prisoners quickly, name, rank, unit, move on. But young Kyoungjong fit no category they had been trained for. His uniform said German. His equipment said Soviet. His face said East Asian. His words said nothing anyone could translate. They took him to the rear. Someone, eventually, found an interpreter who could work out the broad strokes of what he was saying. The story was so unlikely that it moved up the chain of command as a curiosity. A Korean man, conscripted by the Japanese, captured by the Soviets, captured by the Germans, captured by the Americans. For armies. 3 continents. 0 choices. He was sent to a prisoner-of-war camp in Britain. The war ended. The camps emptied. The men went home if they still had homes to go to. Young Kyoungjong did not go back to Korea. The Korea he had left in 1938 no longer existed in any form he would have recognized. The Japanese were gone, but the country was now divided between the Soviets and the Americans, each side building a state in its own image. Within 5 years, they would be at war with each other, and the men caught between those 2 powers would again be conscripted, again be marched to fronts they did not choose, again be asked to die for ideas that were not their own. He had lived that story enough times. He chose a different one. He emigrated to the United States. He settled in Illinois. The records from this period of his life are thin, deliberately so, perhaps. He did not seek attention. He did not write his memoirs. He did not stand at podiums and tell the story that would have made a remarkable book. He lived quietly. He worked. He grew old in a country that had, almost by accident, been the last one to capture him and the first one to let him stay. He died in 1992, in Illinois. He was 72 years old. There is no memorial. There is no plaque. His name does not appear on the walls of any museum dedicated to the Second World War. The men who captured him at Utah Beach never learned his full story, and the armies that conscripted him never recorded his name as anything more than a line item. 1 body, 1 rifle, 1 uniform, interchangeable with any other. But young Kyoungjong was not interchangeable. He was a man who crossed the entire war, east to west, Pacific to Atlantic, one uniform to the next, without ever choosing a side. Because no side ever chose him. He did not fight for Japan. He did not fight for the Soviet Union. He did not fight for Germany. He fought because men with guns told him to, and because the alternative every single time was death. And when the fighting finally stopped, when the last army let go of him, he did the only thing he had never been allowed to do. He chose where to live. He chose to be ordinary. He chose silence. It was perhaps the first real choice he ever made. If the story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold Front. New stories every week.